those of you who got an invite, welcome to Nerd Prom.
No matter where in the world you are, we're all Nerds International. With the hyphen. Nerds International proudly presents.
We want to take you on a quest for knowledge. One that will take us from ancient medieval fantasy across the far reaches of space to the distant future. To many savage worlds.
All right, I'm ready to go. Did you hit your record button?
Yeah.
Great. Just moving a window here. Yellow, 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 yellow. Here we go. You ready? Welcome to the... wait a second. I f***ed it up right out of the gate. Welcome to episode 79 of the Wild Type Podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to Pinnacle Entertainment Savage Worlds aimed at beginners and veterans alike. What's going on, gentlemen? Special guests today. Woohoo! We got Paris Conte on the show. He's my favorite. And then some other lump from Germany. You want to introduce this guy?
Pretty good, Gary. Yeah.
Who's the other guy we got?
Well, it's not his first appearance on the show, so you don't get royal treatment like you did before with the jingle. But yeah, we've got Richard Woolcock, the one and only Mr. Goblin Lord. Richard, welcome on the show.
Thanks for having me again.
Hi, just as I was saying before the show, so this is my first time talking directly to Richard, so I'm having a real fanboy moment here. As
awesome.
Someone who likes to look at the philosophy and the thinking behind rules and the way games are played out, I'm an unashamed fan of Richard and his work, and I'm just gushing a bit here. I'm going to stop. I'm going to cry.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much.
Here's your Oscar.
Me? No, I'm genuinely excited. Okay, maybe the tears are a bit much, but I've been a huge fan of Richard's work for quite a while now, and anyone who hasn't seen Richard's work, you need to go out and have a look at it. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, let's start with some feedback, and then we'll discuss what this show's about. Well, hint. Magic items. Wow.
It's not much of a hint when you literally give away the title of the show.
Sorry.
Are you going to be as crotchety as you were last episode? And anytime we mentioned magic, I don't know, man, you were hulking out. Like you started turning green, and it was frightening.
I'm good. I'm all good.
To start waving a DMG again at you to see if you can tolerate it.
Yeah.
Taking your Prozac, your Xanax, whatever kind of good stuff you can get.
I'll be all right. No,
did you refrain from drinking today?
Yeah, how many beers into the show are you?
Sorry, Rich. This is gonna be fiery.
Second one so far. No, I'm in a good mood. It's my wife and I's 17th wedding anniversary, so it's a good day.
Wow, congratulations.
Wow.
Man.
Is this what you're getting for your anniversary? She let you do the podcast on your anniversary? What kind of a jerk are you? Wow. That's commitment, folks.
We're going to have a nice dinner later and some wine, and tomorrow I'm taking her out for dinner, and yeah, good times.
So let me get this right.
How long have you been married, Gary?
Me? Oh. Yeah. 25 years, I think.
Yeah, so I'm in my 26th year of wedded bliss. So you get to the 17th year, it's like, just leave me alone. Go do your podcast. Do whatever you're going to do. That's it.
What do you want for your anniversary, honey? To be alone? a new wife?
To not see your face. Move.
Leave me alone. Yeah, basically.
So let me get this straight. You're having a couple beers, you're doing a podcast, and she's making you dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, no, it's not good.
How? Hey, you guys question my social skills all the time. I mean, I got it all figured out.
All right. Well, we are doing the Wild Eye podcast, not the Oprah Winfrey show. So let's move on here.
Yeah, let's move on from Dr. Phil and the gang. So, Manuel Sams, former co-host, he says, Paris, +1 size doesn't incur a penalty to attack size 0 people. Size penalties bonus start at size +4. And I'm with you. Daredevil doesn't have blind. He has a special trapping of bad eyes. Also, Gary, no offense, but I'm getting a restraining order. So, wow. There was a little something there that Paris mentioned about the size, and I think people confuse size and scale, and that's where, the size +1 doesn't give you a penalty to attack someone. It's when you get the next size, which is large, and that's at size +4. So,
Manuel Sams, do we know him?
Yeah, we do.
A little bit.
Sorry, buddy. I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
Your restraining order has no effect on me in Canada. I'm just saying.
And then, hi, I'm Oliver from Germany, another German. I've recently started listening to your podcast, and I'm really glad I found it. I'm currently returning to Savage Worlds after years of trying other systems. Your podcast is really lighting up my motivation for my GM work. I'm returning to the first campaign I ever ran, so I'm pretty excited. Just wanted to let you know that you're doing an awesome job. I think it's Rippers he's going back to.
He must have been listening to the dramatic cake episode. I'm also writing you to ask you guys for advice. Besides listening to podcasts, I have an Instagram page with a growing community. I'm drawing Dungeons and Kingdom maps for role-playing games, so I'm kind of a cartographer. You're not kind of a cartographer, you are one. My community mostly consists of D&D players, and the D&D community is pretty active on Instagram. Unfortunately, I've noticed that there aren't a lot of Savage Worlds players, or I just haven't found the right accounts yet. So now I was wondering if you could give some advice on reaching some Savage Worlds players. Thanks for your awesome podcast, and keep it up. Greetings from Germany. So I'm not on Instagram, and I don't think Gary is. I don't think Paris is.
Just jumped on. These maps are amazing. And I realize it's a Savage Worlds podcast, but he's got the Cult role-playing game there, which is something I played many years ago. I love that. He's got Rippers. Very, very cool. In terms of getting new players, where I live at the very southeast of Australia, except for Tasmania, I didn't have any Savage Worlds players, so I had to create mine by just asking people to join in for a game. And as word got out of what we were playing, it turns out that I found some guys that are playing, what's the cowboy one? The names escape me.
Deadlands?
Deadlands, thank you, Deadlands. And I've now had people come up and talk more about Savage World. So I think just get out there, man. Get out to your local game store and ask if anyone wants a game, even if you start with 1 or 2. And things will grow because people get really excited about playing it. And I think that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I think he's mainly asking about connecting with other people on Instagram. So here's his Instagram. He is dungeon.dude on Instagram. So if you're listening to this show and you're on Instagram, connect with Oliver and grow this Savage Rose community that I haven't joined on Instagram because I'm not on Instagram.
I feel like Instagram and a name like Dungeon Dude, you're gonna scroll over to his page and he's gonna be like shirtless and greased up. Do you know what I mean? Like it feels like a trap almost. But yeah, Instagram Dungeon Dude, man. As far as Savage Worlds goes, it is niche, dude. D&D is where it's at. You look at the stats for online role-playing games and compare how many people actually play D&D games versus Savage Worlds or even others for that matter. And what is it, Eric? It's going to be Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, and then basically everybody else falls into the bottom 5% of those, of which we are probably like 4%, being Savage Worlds, which I'm sure it's more than this. This might be a bit of an exaggeration, but yeah, Savage Worlds is very niche, man. In the entire RPG, we fall into the bottom maybe 10, 20%, but we are a spectacular 20%. You should see our raging games of stuff, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Also, jump onto the Savage Worlds group on Facebook and just promote your little Instagram. There'll be other people. Not everyone is as technically inept as Gary and Eric and are on Instagram. I'm just watching these two go, you kids and your tweet books and your facegrams and no, just get on there. You'll meet other people.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, he could even put some of his stuff on swag, put a little adventure together with one of those maps in it.
There you go.
You've seen those one-page dungeons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of thing would work pretty well. I think it was it Frank Turfler recently did one?
Yeah.
It was a really cool looking little product. And so the centerpiece is then the map, and you got information around it, just a minimal amount of information for running the dungeon. And yeah, I mean, this guy's map, Oliver's maps look really good. I think he could certainly do something like that. You just put it on swag as a sort of an advertisement for his stuff. But of course, if he's trying to get into like a gaming group, that's a bit of a different thing altogether, I guess. But he could certainly bring attention. It could draw attention to his work, and other people could see that and look him up, especially if he puts a little Instagram link in the credits.
Excellent idea. Someone else wants to take the next one here, please.
Hit it, Paris.
Hit one. Is this from John?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, John Zadmar. Good episode again. Here are my wild ramblings as usual. Gary's song is awesome.
Yes.
Take a minute to just absorb that. Actually, I got to admit, Gary, I was listening to it in the car, and it was very cool. So you did very well there, Gary.
All right.
Size issues. There should certainly be both upside and downside to being of irregular size, be it smaller or larger, depending on the situation. I just hope you were joking with the brawny edge. If not, you should maybe revisit the size and scale rules. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you. Savage Worlds for beginners. I really hope this Kickstarter is successful. It will be useful every time a GM wants to explain the rules to any new players. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I never thought of just here, watch this, and then I'll just go and get a beer. That'd be awesome.
Because players don't read, so you just give them the link to the YouTube show and watch this.
Fantasy archetypes, the best archetypes in the history of fantasy archetypes. Richard,
and we've got the author here.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Dude, they're beautiful.
Thanks very much. That's very nice.
Fantastic work,
that, Richard.
as usual.
What was the inspiration for the layers? Like, at what point did you go, "Oh man, layers"? That's instead of writing out page per page.
It was actually one of the Pinnacles archetype sets. I can't remember which one it was. I think it may have been Rippers.
Yeah.
And they did it with, I think they did two. They did Novice and Seasoned. And then a while back, I created a product called Savage Dragons. And in that, I got playable dragons, and I did three. I did Novice, Seasoned, and Veteran. But I'd always thought, it wouldn't be cool to have all the ranks in there. And I wanted to put, some sort of extra gimmick in, not just have archetypes, but make them a little bit special. So yeah, I thought I'd put in the layers for the different ranks. I did consider having them literally advance by advance, but it would have just been too much.
Yeah, I agree.
No. So he's given a little tip, though. It says, it's interesting to see how many people do not read the page with instructions, not even as far as a second paragraph. I think that was a dig at you, Gary.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe on the cover or something, Richard, next time it's like layers in big, bold red or something. This means you, Gary, at the bottom. John likes the creative way I approach hindrances and many inspiring tidbits. So thanks, man. And if we ever decide to do a magic items episode, he'd be very interested and would love to hear that one. Well, it's about to happen after these. Yeah. Thank you so much for writing in, man. He's very active on the community on Facebook, and I get a few messages from him. Very cool guy. Thanks again.
Yep. Next up, Eric Buchanan. Just wanted to put my two cents in on the Daredevil hindrance controversy that is tearing our country apart. I didn't know it was. While blind, his other senses more than make up for this fact. In many ways, he perceives way more than an average human. I'd give him a hindrance of quirk, processes information in an alien way. I'll pull an example from the comics. So, back when John Byrne was doing the Fantastic Four comics, one issue guest starred Daredevil. In this issue, the Invisible Girl became a villain called Malice. While fighting Malice alongside of the other Fantastic Four members, Daredevil made a remark about Malice along the lines of her being a globular villain in reference to him sensing her force field. Reed Richards deduced from that remark that Daredevil was using a sense other than sight. So Daredevil had no real hindrance in combat and held his own along with the other members of the Fantastic Four. You could use the quirk hindrance in any matters of which ways, such as his perceptions befuddling those around him or some type of social misunderstanding. So once again, I'm with Team Paris. Go team.
Yes. But that brings up so going back to what we were discussing. So in most instances, Daredevil's blindness is not a hindrance. But let's say when fighting the Invisible Girl and she creates bubbles around herself or bubbles around things, that would certainly, while others could see that it's an invisible, they couldn't see the bubble because it's invisible. To him, all he could see is a bubble. And at that point, I believe the GM would be putting in the hindrances that Gary was talking about before. But thanks for that, man. Thanks, Eric.
We got a lot of feedback about the Daredevil thing, which is good. So I'm waiting till the end of the next two to weigh in again on that for the last final.
I'm not sure if you saw that, Eric, but one of the comments I made was there's a link to a suggestion made by Clint, and that was ages ago. And that was that you could handle Daredevil with the awareness power from the Superpowers Companion, and there's a disability hindrance, which the disability hindrance, it would be a minor version. It would just mean that in certain situations, you have some sort of negative effect. So almost like the quirk, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Ken Ryan writes in, it is necessary at this point to say that Paris killed Gary on the Daredevil dispute. Let's just take that for a moment.
Nah.
Anything you want to say, Gary?
Yeah, I don't like this guy. Who is this jerk?
Because he did. Related to that, I would like to see the adventure with the 799 green buttons and 1 red button, or vice versa, trap room. I believe Gary's writing that as we speak.
The Death of Daredevil. That's the adventure title.
Love the show. Whether I agree or not, you guys never cease to entertain, and I never feel like you're sucking up to anyone. Thanks. I also wanted to mention that as a teacher, I think the work Paris is doing is amazing. If I wasn't the supply teacher, I would start his program at whatever school I was at. Keep it up. Thank you. I'm not sure. What's a supply teacher? I haven't heard that term here.
I don't know, but judging, because Ken was such a jerk to me, I want to say that it is a subpar teacher. That's what I want to say.
I was thinking maybe it's a substitute teacher, like someone that fills in when other teachers are away or something like that.
I think that's what it is, yeah.
Yeah, he's the guy that teaches the supplies how to be supplies, like the broom how to sweep and stuff. That's what he does.
It's like a substitute teacher if the main one's not there.
All right, cool. Yeah, don't listen to Gary. He's just salty. Man, in terms of that, thank you. It's actually I'm very blessed to do what I do. I have a lot of sort of fist pumping awesome moments, but just in terms of that, like you could still run a game at whatever school you go to, and you just never know who you'll inspire. You'll pick up some kid that'll run with it, and then he'll GM for other kids, or she will GM for other kids, and just that one spark alone, just have a quick one shot at whatever school you rock up. If you get a chance, that'd be awesome.
Hope you got enough room in that supply closet for a table.
Just don't use Gary's 799 green buttons and 1 red button adventure. I hear that's a bit of a sorry, I can't keep it straight. I'm just looking at how salty Gary is. It's very cool.
Where's everybody pecking on me? Look at this guy's look at this guy. He's on my side. Michael Minot says, Paris is an idiot. I don't know why you guys let him on the show. That Gary guy is an outright genius. Oh, and it doesn't really say that, does it?
No.
Yeah.
Why don't you read the real thing?
Regarding the Daredevil, it's really easy. Just give him hindrance blind minor. It's usually irrelevant, but when it comes into play, it can be real harsh. I have a player who wanted to be Daredevil-esque, so I gave him Blind Major, but he has the Edge Sonar. Ooh, that's cool. He gains 2 points from taking Blind Major, spends it on the Edge, so it evens out. For future cases like this, I'd say if you simply look at the race creator for inspiration. That's kind of a neat way to go.
But the blind edge actually gives you an extra. So the blind hindrance gives you an extra edge as well. So blind effectively would give you 2 edges for the same price. You get the free edge because you've taken blind, as is described in the blind hindrance itself. And then, unless they change that in Suede, I don't think they have they?
Well, you could spend the points to get the hindrance points to get a raise in a stat too, right? So
yeah. But what I mean is, so normally a major hindrance gives you 2 points, but then blind, because it's so bad, in addition gives you a bonus edge.
Yeah, I looked it up. It does.
It does still do that. Okay. I can never remember. Every time I go to answer something about the rules, I have to second guess myself because I'm never sure what's changed in Suede.
Yep. Welcome to this show. That's what this entire show's about.
So here's my thing about the Daredevil thing. Okay, he's blind. Of course, the -6 to combat and see and all that doesn't apply anymore because he's got other senses that he uses. But I like the blind minor approach where it can still create interesting role play situations. So I know Richard mentioned the thing from Clinton Black with disability, but it's just naming things the same way, I think. Because to me, if you don't give him blind as a hindrance, and this is part of the tropes in comic books, the powers get neutralized people all the time. And even in Necessary Evil, I think there's a gun that actually neutralizes powers from the players. If he loses his senses, and he doesn't have the blind hindrance, then he can see, which is stupid. So don't be stupid. Give him blind as a hindrance. Move on. I'm right. You guys are wrong.
I agree.
Welcome to the Wild Eye Podcast, or otherwise known as Eric's Dictatorship.
I don't want to hear another word about this thing.
Salty.
All right. So thanks everybody for writing, commenting, all that stuff on Facebook. It's always nice to hear from people, even when they're wrong. That's nice.
Something I've never quite been able to marry in my head in this show. It's like, you guys are awesome and suck at the same time.
We do it so well.
Listeners, you're all wrong.
It's part of it. So let's move on to some news.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the news. The news is incoming. Prepare yourself for the news. News! And some announcements about the Nerds International Network and the Wild Die Podcast.
Coming to Kickstarter, June 27th, is the new Savage setting, Guardians of Umbra. Players Valkyrie, Revenants, and other creatures return from myth and folklore. Take on mecha Nazis, Tesla-powered madmen, and other savage creatures in this Tesla punk World War II setting. Guardians of Umbra contains new races, edges, hindrances, arcane backgrounds, and much more. The Game Master's Guide will provide tons of antagonists, hazards, traps, and everything else you could need to run adventures in Umbra and on Earth during this chaotic and bloody war. For additional information leading up to the Kickstarter, check out the Wild Day podcast on Guardians of Umbra with Michael Barabo. Have I said that correctly?
Yeah, Barabo.
Yeah. Or following Guardians of Umbra on Facebook. I am pretty excited for that campaign, I got to admit.
I think Gary is too. He got a little gift from Michael.
Yeah, I gotta say, I got this cool little. It's a mini, and it's not a paper mini, but it's still a mini. But it's actually really cool because I think part of the Kickstarter is, or so at least some of the, what do you call them, the advances or whatever, are going to be these 3D minis, and he's selling like minis that you can get into the system into the Guardians of Umbra with. But it's cool, dude. It's like this giant lumbering guy that is mutated, and you can decide what hand you want because it comes with like multiple arms, which is freaking sweet. So you can have like a tentacle claw, or you could put a hammer on there, and it comes with all these different parts. You glue it all together and build it the way you want it to be. It's pretty neat.
Is that the dude in the jumpstart?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Just say yes.
Oh, yeah. You mean
the artwork in the jumpstart? It matches that art. I don't remember the name exactly of that creature, but
so is it like the what's that? The tool online where you can design your own minis? There's a website, or is it like that you get like a mold with different pieces and you glue the pieces you want together?
Yeah, you get the kit like that. It's not like Hero Forge where you design.
Hero Forge,
yeah, you just get a couple attachment, like Gary says, and if you want, you can even probably glue the 2 arms in the back if you want to. Why not?
I get so excited for stuff like that in Kickstarters, and then I look at the shipping to Australia and I cry a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we had Michael on the show. Well, we reviewed the Jumpstart for Guardians of Umbra, and then he came on the show and talked about it. So go back to these episodes if you want to find out more. And it's going live June 27th. So make sure to give you support there. But now we're going to take it to the edge with a discussion on magic items, and this is going to be presented by the one and only Paris, and we're glad that we have Richard Woolcock's expertise on the topic. So let's do this.
You're listening to the Wild Die Podcast. 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 Listen 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 to the Wild Die Podcast.
Do this. Yeah. I realize that this is a voice medium, but if you could just see Eric's face when he says magic items, I mean, seriously, he couldn't hate anything more.
I thought he was eating a lemon or something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know about the one and only Paris Coney, but we've certainly got the one and only Richard Woolcock on the show, and so he'll be taking most of this. But what we want to discuss today is he's leaving. That's how salty Eric is. He's leaving the podcast.
Before it even nothing to do with this.
Before it even starts.
Take a short bathroom break before we actually get on the topic.
See, we've given him the shits already.
Wow, just like that. That's a, in and out, dude, gone.
Well, you know what they say when the cat's away. So today we want to discuss magic items in Savage Worlds, how they should be approached, how they should be used. So those of you that's been following, at least Eric and I banter it out on Facebook, we've been having differing opinions on magic items and how they apply to Savage Worlds. While most of the topic has been around specifics of how to create them within Savage Worlds, especially alchemy has been a sticking point for me in terms of how it's handled in Suede. But give you a bit of background, I've had a couple of players at some of my groups with more advanced characters come to me and say, look, Paris, we want to be able to make, I don't know, magic sword, magic armor. How do we do that in Savage Worlds? And I gave the same look that I give whenever I don't know what I'm doing, which is like a deer in the headlights, and then I make something up and try and avoid the situation. And then I give my best line, which is, I'll look into it, and then try and promptly move away. So what I've seen happen in the past is that when people have converted other material to Savage Worlds, and we're not doing that debate about whether we should convert or not, what I've seen is, let's say if you take a D&D 5e adventure or a Pathfinder adventure and you're running it as sort of red, there's a lot of magic items in these adventures. And if you were just to apply them sort of face value with their pluses and minuses, that can, in my experience, can really change how the game is played, because Savage Worlds is, I think we can all agree, is geared around evolving the character as opposed to giving it more stuff to make it better like some of the other systems do. So we got Richard on. He is our preeminent expert on magic items and magic and fantasy worlds within Savage Worlds. And what I'd like to ask you, Richard, first of all, is how, with all the stuff that you've designed for magic items in a fantasy world, how did you look at it differently through a Savage Worlds lens? And how do you feel magic items should be applied within games? Is that too broad a topic?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends, I think, on the style of game you want to run. Savage Worlds is not as granular, say, as D&D. So, a small bonus in Savage Worlds makes a big difference. So what you really have to be careful of is, applying large bonuses that can have a massive impact. I mean, if you have a sword, this I think I played a Sunder Skies campaign, and one of the magic items you can get in that, and even in, I believe, in 50 Fathoms, you can just magic item tables, aren't they, Gary? And you can get some magical items which give you, like, say, a bonus of +1 or even +2 to hit and damage, which is a massive bonus.
Not only that, they are fantastically done. I love the way that they're done in Savage Worlds. It's super cool.
Okay, well, there you go. Gary loves 50 Fathoms. We know that. So my preference is to have magic items being a lot weaker, so that they can add flavor to the game, but they don't stack up massive bonuses. I don't know if you've looked at some of the fan things I did, the earlier ones, like the Savage Armory, for example. Yep. And in that, you can get like small bonuses, like the smallest bonus would be, say, +1 damage if you hit with a raise, which is kind of a pretty small bonus. And the bonuses do rack up. But the way I did that was to work out the impact of different bonuses by running them through my combat simulator. So I had a very good idea of just how strong each bonus was. And I made sure that if you did have a magic item, that either you would have to buy an edge, which gave you this magical item attunement, so you were effectively buying the bonuses as an edge anyway, or else the bonuses for high quality items were lower than the bonus you would get from an edge. So I very much kept the bonuses in check. But if you're looking at other items, like if you're talking about, I don't know, like a Ring of Featherfall or Ring of Protection or all sorts of magical armor and so on that you can get in games like D&D, I think you have to be very careful because the bonuses do just really stack up. So for something like that, I would try and stick more with flavor things. So, you can say if you want to have enchanted leather armor, you say, okay, but it has the same bonus as chainmail armor. So it's not really any more powerful than someone could get with regular gear. And one of the things I did with my archetypes was there's the necromancer that's got this entropic staff, which has actually got the same stats as a spear instead of a staff. And there's no reason why he couldn't have had a spear, It's just for flavor purposes. It looked nicer if he had a staff. So that's kind of the trapping approach to it. And you can do other things like that as well. If you want to have, say, a magic sword that glows in the dark, then really it's only providing the same bonus as a lantern. Or you could have a flaming sword, which just gives you the same trapping as you would have on, say, a flaming bolt or a fireball or something like that. So you try and keep the bonuses down to more flavor type bonuses rather than flat out modifiers.
Does that change at all as from your perspective as a GM? So if that's in novice and let's novice and seasoned, those pluses are certainly over the top. But do you then scale magic items as the characters get higher in level, or do you still keep it around that same?
I still keep it around the same. To be honest, I don't think that the character advancement in Savage Worlds tends to be very flat. If you can easily create a novice character who's much more effective in combat than a legendary character. The rank doesn't really mean a lot because the characters tend to sort of get broader in ability rather than literally getting more and more powerful. Once you've got your fighting die to D12, yeah, you can push it up a little bit, but then it comes more down to edges. And if you're talking about a non-combat character, like say a character who's a thief who wants to be really stealthy, okay, you can get your stealth up to D12, you can get the thief edge. But after that, well, you don't really improve very much. Maybe at legendary, you can push your skill a bit further. But it's not like I hate to keep making comparisons to D&D, but that's obviously the obvious parallel when you're talking about games with lots of magic items. And if you're looking about something like in D&D, where your characters, at low level, you're really incompetent, And then like at 20th level, your character can swim up waterfalls because you can make such good skill rolls. And you don't have that in Savage Worlds. I tend to think of it in terms of it's like starting at level 5 and ending at level 12. That's the kind of comparison for me. So Savage Worlds tends to be much flatter, much minimal advancement. Your characters get broader in scope rather than getting outright more powerful. And as such, I wouldn't tend to give them much more powerful magical items at higher ranks.
So I think the thing that I know I struggled with in the beginning when I came across the Savage Worlds with fantasy. So I was used to, as a GM, I wouldn't say handing out magic items like candy, but I certainly didn't, and this could be just me, but I didn't have I just had this sort of acceptance that magic was part of the world of D&D, and you would hand out these magic items. They laid around everywhere. If you just pick up an adventure, everything had a magic item. So when I came across the Savage Worlds and I was applying that in the beginning, I would suddenly have all these players at the table that would just rip through everything that I had. And as I've evolved with Savage Worlds, I've really come to understand that when you put magic into your Savage World setting, it's more than just a thing. It's not just another weapon. Magic really has to be understood within the context of the setting, and its place is important, and how it's applied. It can't just be there as let's say D&D. So with magic items, would you give any advice to, let's say, new and upcoming GMs or existing GMs on what advice would you give on how to view magic within Savage Worlds and within the setting? How, like, in terms of how much influence it has over the setting and how it should be played out? Because unless I miss my guess, magic in Savage Worlds, when things go wrong, have greater issues than they do in other systems. Would you agree with that, or am I outside?
Well, they to some extent. I mean, they took out the backlash. Now it's much less effective, or has much less impact than it did in the old Savage Worlds Deluxe.
Well, we can bring it back because
you can do, yeah. But it is also the case that the magic is less reliable. You have to make a roll. It's not just something that's automatic when you're casting spells, for example. But you did keep using that word setting, and I think that's the important thing, that it's not something specific to the system itself. It is really about the settings that you play in. And if you're taking, say, like when I ran War of the Burning Sky, which was originally a D&D setting, and I ran that with Savage Worlds, there was the implication there that people tended to have a lot of magic gadgets. So I did actually have quite a few magic gadgets in there, but I tried to make them cool toys rather than bonuses. But a lot of the Savage World settings aren't really designed with a lot of magic items in mind. And I mentioned Sundered Skies before, and there's also 50 Fathoms, and they do both have tables for magic items that you can find. And I think that was very much the case for
the Fantasy Companion. Really, it's basically.
I think you're right. I don't, not off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but I think this also goes back to some of the older Savage World settings that tended to have a bit more of an old school fantasy type feel to them. They tended to, like the first Savage World setting, which was what was it? The horror, fantasy horror one. The Evernight, thank you. Yeah, so the Evernight was very much designed like a D&D module. To me, it was very much like a D&D module for Savage Worlds. And you can see that as the newer settings came in, and they started turning into these plot point campaigns, it was like a progression. And likewise, the Fantasy Companion, it has a lot of very direct parallels to the like D&D style of gameplay. I think before the Fantasy Companion, you had the toolkits, and they actually did have magic item creation rules in them. And it's been a kind of a progress that the early Savage World stuff had a very strong D&D feel, I felt, like with direct parallels with the edges and the magic item lists and a lot of stuff like that. And as Pinnacle have kind of improved their products over the years, they've moved away from that, and they've become much more minimalist in terms of magical items and so on. And they focus much more on the story.
Yeah,
so
notice the word improved there, Paris.
Yeah,
improved.
No, well, I'm not saying that removing the magic items is an improvement, but rather Pinnacle have definitely much improved. They've very much improved their settings over the years. And you look back at some of the older settings, and they're cool, but they're a lot cruder. They're a lot less polished. whilst the newer settings that they've released are really, really good. They look really nice. They're well thought out. They don't have the big plot holes and so on. They're more fleshed out. And I feel that they've kind of changed. They've taken it from almost like a D&D style product with the earlier settings, and they've shifted across to something that's very different. And the newer settings really don't have that. Like if you look at the Lankmar and so on, they don't have the expectation that people will find lots of magic treasure, and they don't have the direct parallels to the D&D archetypes and so on.
Well, that's because it hits on different tropes. It's more of this low fantasy sword and sorcery trope. But to get back to what Paris asked about how to handle magic items. So in the Swade book, this is in Arcane Devices, which is a small section of the book, like 2 pages, right? And it's page 153. And this is what Pinnacle has to say about magic item called Arcane Devices there, but they say, note, arcane devices are relatively temporary creations player characters can create from their powers. Truly permanent magic items or devices are setting specific, don't use PowerPoints, and are created by the game master as she sees fit, such as those found in Savage Worlds Fantasy Companion. So if you're looking for an official answer, I think that's the thing, and that's where I think they give people the power, whether it be swag people or aces or homebrew people, to just go ahead and create their own magic items for their setting. And I don't know if it's because they don't want to mix in with it, or maybe it's part of the philosophy. If we go back to the episode we had where Clinton Black came on the show, where he explained that Savage Worlds is a much more modular system instead of a generic system, where it's meant as you've got a foundation, which are the rules, the core rules, and then each setting add on to these rules. They add what they need. So that's why that's what kind of bugs me about the whole discussion. Paris making fun of me, getting angry, is that I don't believe that it's the core rules job to answer these questions. It's very setting specific. And companion, granted, the companion needs an upgrade, and we should be getting it this year or maybe next year. But yeah, that's basically my stance on it.
Yeah, I don't think that it's saying that the fantasy companion will have rules for players to create the magic items, though.
No, I don't think
and
so.
I'm pretty sure from the discussion, there was a discussion on Facebook where I think it was Shane made it quite clear that he wasn't keen on the idea of players being able to create their own magic items. So
no, well, it's basically he was questioning how fun is it to He was making an analogy with Shadowrun and the Deckers that goes on their separate way, and then decide to, they'll take an hour out of the game session just to do their own thing. And to him, creating permanent magic items would be the same thing in Savage Worlds. But in response to that, Christian Serrano released a small product on the Adventurers Guild called the Artificer's Codex, which basically gives you rules there to create permanent magic items. If you don't know the background of it, Christian has been working on a Savage Worlds adaptation of Eberron for years. And I think he basically did that for Savage Eberron. Eberron is known to have magic everywhere, basically. It's widespread. And but then again, I looked at the rules, and there aren't really that many rules to create permanent magic items in Eberron. The Artificers create temporary magic items. But the rules are there, and for pay what you want, if you're really interested in that, you can check it out. It raises some questions to me with regards to balance in there, but the rules are there.
All right. So without without starting a new debate, my issue is that my issue originally wasn't that the rules weren't there, and certainly that they're not in Sway, because I certainly understand this modular thing, right? My problem with it is that we get these questions over and over, right? Whether it's from me or someone else online, and we, as you've pointed out, you've answered them for 10 years, right? But those things have never been addressed. And when we've got this fantasy companion coming up, isn't now the time we should be talking about what we want to see in it, right? And while I appreciate that creating magical items at the table would be as dull as, it'd be very boring, right? I would never do that. But before the show, Richard was talking about how, at higher levels, D&D characters, you'd have your warrior that was getting his army ready, and your thief or your rogue would start building part of his thieves guild, and your mage would go, I'm going to go and do some research, and that would be like a
downtime.
Downtime thing, right? The thing is, Savage World should be all about possibilities. Anything should be able to be done at your table. All right. So I'm not arguing that there must be rules for making magic items. What I'm asking though is, if someone comes and asks that question, it shouldn't be held down. We should at least have, as a group, we could come up as an answer with awesome suggestions, because we're a very open and intelligent group that likes to look at these mechanics, especially someone like Richard, for instance, who keeps honing down on different rule sets, which is why we have him today.
That's why we're having this episode, really. Exactly. I mean, I can't answer for the thousands of fans on Facebook that like to be mean, and I'm a troll every now and then too, but this is why we're having this episode, so that people can get some ideas out of what we have. And I was talking with Gary about this last week, and Gary mentioned something. Well, he's played D&D for 35 years, and now he's a big fan of ICRPG too. And you were just talking about downtime, and Gary mentioned that there's something in there in ICRPG that I could see that could be used in Savage Worlds too. So why don't you talk about the downtime thing there, Gary, where a character would want to create something for their character?
Well, in D&D, for example, like in Adventurers League, when the adventure is over, you actually get downtime. It's part of what depending on what faction you're with, if you're with like the Order of the Gauntlet or, something along those lines, that there's certain factions, you could be a Harper or any of those things, right? Depending on what adventure you do, when it's all said and done in Adventurers Guild, you would gain renown with that faction, so your rankings would go up. You'd also gain not only XP or treasure or money, you also gain downtime, so you can spend your downtime doing certain things. Now, I didn't think when they first came out with this it was very fleshed out, but at the end of a typical adventure, you would get 5 downtime days, and you could spend those downtime days doing basically whatever you want, learning a new language if you had enough downtime days, or crafting, for example. Although again, crafting it's not something that you do inside of Dungeons and Dragons, because magic is such a prevailing theme that crafting them is pointless. Now, we were talking earlier, and Richard and I was saying that you could just take your money and go to a shop and buy a magic item. And Richard's right away, he's like, no, you can't. But the thing is you can. You could go to a magic shop, you can talk to the guy that is in the magic shop, and you can say, look, I'm looking for this item. And he might be, well, I happen to have it, or he'll be like, let me make some phone calls, and he'll cast a few spells, ask around the realms, and you can basically he could say, you could go to the town of, let's say, Hillsfar, for example. You could go there, and the local magician in that town happens to have one that somebody brought in and got rid of. Magic items aren't tied to your person, so you can always sell them, or although it's kind of like a frowned upon thing, which is kind of weird. But ICRPG handles it a little bit differently, because the game rotates in time segments. So when you're playing the game, once you get into town, in combat, you're in what's called mere moments, and then everything that's basically rounds of combat. While you're traveling to town, your time frame would be hours, and you would convey that to your players by like, what are you doing while you drive or ride your horse to town? And they would say things like, during the next hour, I'm going to read a potion, or I'm going to bandage my wounds, or I'm going to, keep watch and ride ahead, etc., etc. When they get into town, now it's like, okay, you have to wait, a week, for example, for your shipment of whatever it is, ogre feathers, let's just say, for being, to show up from this other place, because you need them to trap some kind of weird mystical thing. So then when you're in days, it's like, what are you going to do during these downtime days or over the course of these days? And it's just as simple as them saying, I'm going to spend the next week crafting this thing. And then you can say, okay, and I wouldn't even make it a thing. Like, I feel like you guys are overcomplicating the whole thing by, I know that you're saying balance, but Savage Worlds is a game where there is no balance. So how can you, if there's already no balance to begin with, how is implementing a magic item going to throw the balance off in a game that is not balanced to begin with, especially with acing dice? And I think Richard hit on it as well, where you said they should be more toys that give you options than they should be items that give you skills or you know what I mean, like bonuses. And that's what I view magic items as. They should be options for you that when you come across an obstacle, you have a variety of things that you could pick from. Like, let's say you come up to a gigantic wall, right? Well, I've got one guy, Johnny, the bugbear barbarian guy. He's got a hammer that anytime he strikes a wall will dig out like a 10-foot square, so he could go through the wall. Or you've got the thief who's got a ring of flight that could fly up and drop rope down and everybody could climb over. Like, it just gives you options on how you want to proceed. And that's how I view magic items. As far as creating them, I would not, the time frame that it takes to create a magic item should not be something that you do in game, because that is, I think, what Clint is talking about, where you don't want to focus on somebody for an hour while they make a magic item, while the rest of your party sits there with their thumbs up their butts, and you and this guy go back and forth. So I would make crafting instantaneous, so to speak. It's a hard call because it depends on your setting too, right? So I don't know. That's kind of how I would go about it. Why make it a hard thing? And just talk about it with your players, see what they want to do. What is it they're looking at making? Also, too, it can be, if you're playing in fantasy or whatever, it can be a reason to go campaigning. You need to go find this Onyx Eye gem or something like that, and that's how you would go about it. So I don't know if that even answered the question.
No, it does. I saw you stir in there over there, Richard, when you mentioned the balance and magic items. What were you going to say?
Well, I don't agree that Savage Wars isn't balanced. You can argue that it's not well balanced, but there is definitely a balance there. I reverse engineered a lot of it. You can kind of see the impact of different things, and it is possible to. It's not perfectly balanced. You're right. It's a lot more swingy than a lot of other games because of the exploding dice. It's a lot less predictable. But taken on average, you can sort of determine the balance for a lot of things. But I think also when it comes to magic items, one of the things I wanted to mention is that even if you don't like the idea of players spending downtime doing activities, which can kind of depend on the campaign, there is a certain value in having a structure set out for how people can create items. Because what I found was every time somebody looked at the fantasy companion, they say, oh, look, there's all these cool magic items. So how do you create them then? And I say, oh, well, only NPCs can do that. But, NPCs can create it. Why can't I create it? And you've got it all there. And I think it's useful to be able to say, well, you could, but look, you'd have to invest in all of these edges and you'd have to spend a lot of your time doing it. So even if it's just to kind of show people that it is possible and that's how the NPCs do it, rather than trying to keep it as a sort of a mysterious thing and nobody knows where exactly these magic items come from. In particular, because they do have these, in the older rules, for example, there was the alchemist arcane background. And they could create their potions, but these potions, they had to invest their power points into it, and it worked completely differently. And it was just a kind of a feeling of it being very unfair. The NPCs could do all this cool stuff, and the players couldn't. And that's something I didn't really like very much. But I think if you've got the rules in there, and you can say, okay, maybe some campaigns or some settings, they do have periods of downtime when players can do their activities, like the warrior. As I said before, I think before the show started, the warrior can be training a bunch of soldiers for an army. The thief can be building up his connections and his networking and building up his thieves guilds, and the bard can be going out and seducing the king's daughter or the king's son or whatever. And the mage can be researching spells or creating magic items. And it doesn't even have to be very long. You can have, for example, potions very often shown as something that can be produced reasonably quickly, to the point that it wouldn't be much different from the spellcaster resting overnight to recover their power points. Okay, that's actually not such a big deal in the new rules, but there is still a case that the spellcaster can have to rest for a while to recover power points. And if you can put together a potion within an hour, there's no reason why characters shouldn't be able to do something like that if they have the ability to do so.
No, I agree with you. The potions are sort of in their own, like alchemy kind of falls into its own deals. You just want to spend those power points and drop it into a potion until you rest or recover those power points. I don't like the idea of them being lost or not available to you. Like, let's say you have 15 and you dump 5 into a potion. That potion sits in somebody's backpack and you're down 5 points until he drinks it, and then you can regain them. Somebody had mentioned that before. I'm not a fan of that idea, and that wouldn't fly at my table. It would take you like the standard 5 hours or whatever to get your 5 magic points back, but I like that idea of imbuing a thing. As far as making magic items go, because there's so many intricacies in building a magic item. Let's say you want to take a hammer, for example. First off, you need to know how to smith, and you need to know how to woodwork, because you're going to have to build a handle and the actual hammer for it. Then you're going to have to know how to enchant it with certain things so that it can actually hold the magic. Then you're going to have to cast the magic into it, which could be anything from simply casting a spell on it, or even so much as like maybe imbuing it with gems or something like that. If you don't want to get that complicated into your games, that could be easily how you explain why it has to be done in a town. It has to take X amount of time. You're going to have to talk to multiple people to do it, as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, you have suddenly the magic ability to go create this weird hammer, bow, whatever kind of a thing, and know all this stuff, which is why, unless you wanted to spend your downtime learning multiple things, like you said, I think it's best just to leave it up to NPCs. And then at that rate, you could just have the guy, while you're off doing your next adventure, create whatever it is that you wanted to have, and then just come back and pay for it.
Well, I think that's where setting specific comes in, because to determine how magic works and how magic items are created in your campaign world or whatever, it becomes very important. Let's say I have in my campaign, to create magic items, you needed to bind demons to an item first, and then maybe I would turn it into a big kind of ritual, so a dramatic task. And if I fail the dramatic task, that demon's not very happy with what happened. So there's kind of a counterpoint, a risk. I like mechanics in a game where there's a consequence for failure. And I think that's where a lot of the rules that I've seen for creating magic items fail, in the sense that if you fail to create the magic items, or even in some games, you don't even have to make a roll for it. There's no consequence. Sure, you'll lose some time, or maybe you'll lose some money. But to me, money, the economy in a game is something very fickle, where, some GM might give people 10,000 of gold pieces every session, and the other GMs gives only 100. So money, the economy, doesn't make really a whole lot of sense to me. But
well, it certainly doesn't in Savage Worlds, because unless I'm the only GM that doesn't do it, money has never been really important in my Savage Worlds games. Even in the campaign, it's more about the adventure than accumulating a whole bunch of wealth. But sorry, touching on what Richard was saying, just about some structure there in terms of how you would address contemplating building magic items for your for your world. And heading back to the alchemist thing is how this whole conversation started. A question given to me is, how do my player asked, I want to be an alchemist, how do I do it? We looked at the rules, we didn't like what we saw, and not only that, what we saw that really confused us, so that it stuck out to me, was that if I would decided to have my setting with no PowerPoints, alchemy is impossible. You cannot play alchemy if you have no PowerPoints. Right?
Yeah, there's ways around that. But the first question I would ask you with this is it possible to create magic items in your setting?
Yeah, Tropicana. I got me a magic Hawaiian shirt.
We have banged on in various sections of Savage Worlds about edges, abilities, powers, whatever, and we've always said the same thing. If an NPC, or if a PC can do it, an NPC can do it. If an NPC can do it, then the PCs can do it. That's how we teach people how to do the rules. It's how we teach them how to use gang up. It's how we teach them how to use wild attacks. It's how we teach them how to use their powers and show trappings and blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden we have a situation where NPCs can create stuff willy-nilly, but a player can go suck it.
Yeah, I don't like that philosophy.
He's a wild card. He's a wild card. He's got wounds and he's got a wild die. So NPCs and wild cards aren't the same at all.
Well,
yeah.
Okay, but in Savage Worlds, I know it's often the case that NPCs are not built in the same way as player characters, and that's kind of well established. But I also think it is pretty frustrating for a player when they see an NPC can do all this cool stuff, and there's no rules for them to be able to do it at all. You know, it's one thing if they can look at the rules and say, "Oh, look, I could do that too." Oh, but it would mean that I'd have to just invest in a massive laboratory, and I'd need to spend all of this time doing this, and I guess it's not worth it. And it's one thing if it's like something that's kind of left as a downtime activity, maybe if you're based around a town. But if there's no rules at all for it in there, it does feel kind of frustrating for a player that really wants to be able to do that. It's best to show them how it's done, and then they can decide for themselves if they really want to invest in it.
Yeah.
So imagine you were running an adventure where you raid the lair of this wizard who creates all these wonderful items, and you've got a character in there that's just so in love with information. They want to know everything about the arcane, and you take out this wizard, you raid his stash, you find all these books, and the books where it goes on about how you create everything is blank. You'd be pretty pissed as the player, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but then again, the focus of a campaign when you're the hero of an adventure isn't that you live in a town and have a job.
Well, it depends on the setting. You could easily have an urban fantasy game, and in fact, I've run an Eberron campaign where the entire party was set in Sharn, City of Towers, and the entire campaign was about them establishing their foothold in this city and fighting off rival organizations. So it does depend on the setting.
The thing is, you can do that, but generally speaking, I got two things to say. A fantasy or a magic item creation should not be in core, because there is no magic items in things like Tropicana. So if you're taking core as your base layer and putting Tropicana over it, or any setting that doesn't involve that, that's why it should be setting specific. So that's why you won't find any rules for it in the core book. So we have to set core aside and talk about things like, let's talk about the fantasy companion or fantasy games. Now, Richard, you're just saying that you played this specific type of game, but I totally disagree with Paris's philosophy, even though you've played a game like that, generally speaking, and I'm sure I've read it somewhere before in D&D, you are not typical. You are the cream of the crop. You are you're like almost like superhero dude, even at level 1. You stand so far out above other people. That's what makes you the player character and the rarity in the world. You're the hero, right? The hero's not just everybody. And to add to it, also there's specific games that you can get where you play commoners. You know, that's why they're called common people, and you're the hero. So I think NPCs.
If you're comparing this to D&D, it's worth noting in D&D there really are rules for creating magic items.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think this is one of the philosophies that I don't like, is that you do see this with some of the decisions in the Savage Worlds books, where they, for example, they leave out things like scrying and so on, where they say they don't think that sort of thing belongs in a Savage Worlds game. And yeah, I do understand what you're saying. It doesn't necessarily belong in core. I do agree with that, in fact. But the fact that there were no rules for magic item creation in the Fantasy Companion, which had all the rules for magic items.
Yeah, and that's weird. Big miss.
Bear in mind that before the Fantasy Companion, there was the Fantasy Toolkits, and those actually did have edges for creating magic items, but they took it out when they merged those toolkits into the Fantasy Companion.
Now, is
So
there
they
a,
actually chose to leave it out because they felt that I'm not quite sure. I think I'm not specifically sure why they took it out. Either they didn't like it, or they felt it didn't belong in the companion. So,
do you know of a setting that is magic item heavy that would have rules for creating it or creating magic items? Any of you? Is there one out there?
well, if you're converting any of the D&D settings, then yeah. I mean, and in fact, if you look at my Savage Fantasy and Magic, which had the rules for playing D&D style spellcasters, that also had the edges for creating magic items in it. And that's what I used when I ran War of the Burning Sky, which is a very magic heavy setting. I don't know of any settings specifically designed for Savage Worlds. And as I mentioned to you before, yeah, the older settings did have a lot of magic items, but the newer settings tend to be have much less emphasis on that.
Yeah, but there is really nothing that has magic item creation rules in it inside of a setting for Savage Worlds.
No.
None that I know of.
Like you wouldn't find it in Hellfrost, or you wouldn't find it in.
Oh, Hellfrost does, yes. Hellfrost has rules for
Hellfrost,
creating alchemy, like minor potions and so on.
Yeah, but it's very minor. It's herbalism. And you got the legendary weapons also, but you don't really create them. It's basically as your legend grows, your weapon is imbued with kind of godly powers.
One setting I could also mention, although it's maybe a bit of a cheat because I was the one that wrote the companion for it, but Drakenheim. The Drakenheim Savage Companion has an alchemy edge, and the alchemy edge allows you to create potions. Of course, the problem with potions is that then players can stack up tons and tons and tons of potions. So the way I worked around that was that with these, you can drink a potion, but the magical effects linger in your body for about an hour. And if you drink more potions during that hour, it has a negative reaction.
See, the players will always find a way to screw you. I hate them so much.
But and this is I think where the discussion that Eric and I deviated, because it turned into why isn't this in core, which is not what I was arguing. What I was arguing, or what I'm asking the community, and this seems to come back at me attacking the community, and I'm not. The question is that, and Richard's highlighted it, they've taken certain things out of Savage Worlds, going, that doesn't fit our core rule set, or that doesn't fit the philosophy of Savage Worlds. And yet we have people that come in from other systems that love what Savage Worlds can do in combat, what Savage Worlds can do with edges and hindrances. And then they turn around and go, well, I used to be able to do that, and I want to do it in this system, which is a universal system, essentially. And we go, as a community, we go, oh, no, that doesn't fit our philosophy. That's not part of it. We don't do that. And then we wonder why people go, well, Savage Worlds isn't as good a game as we think it is. And we get as a community, we get indignant, we get upset when people go, oh, it's just a game where all the characters are the same, and or there's not much. It's just for pulp fiction, pulp games and stuff like that. Whereas there's people like myself who sit there and go, look, I want to run a D&D style campaign, and I want to add all these bits in. And then when you go to the community and say, hey, I want to do this, and they go, piss off back to D&D, that's very counterproductive for our hobby. It's counterproductive for our system, the system that we love. Right now, I play a lot of fantasy because that's what a lot of kids gravitate to, right? It's harder to do sci-fi. It's harder to do horror with my group of kids. So I'm going to give you a plug here, Richard. I'm constantly, every week, there's not a week that doesn't go by where I'm not on godwars2.org/Savage Worlds, where Richard has got Savage Fantasy Magic, Savage Ability, Savage Armory, Savage Arcanum, Savage Spellbook. And I'm grabbing stuff out of there all the time because there's a place where all these things fit. So because I don't want to get into a debate about why people are nasty to other people and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to turn it away, but I want people to think about that. We can't just go, there isn't a rule for it, suck it, move on. Savage Worlds, we should be allowed to say as a community, ask a question and people give suggestions. That might not be the right answer, but I think we should do magic items this way. Or, yeah, that's a great idea. There isn't anything in the book, but have you thought of doing it this way instead of piss off back to another system? That sucks, man. I hate that. It really gets.
It's a really lazy excuse. I've seen this before as well. Even with my fantasy archetypes, when there was some guy who goes, "Oh, what's the point in having fantasy archetypes? Just play D&D," and it's just lazy because obviously if people wanted to play in D&D, they'd be playing D&D, but people like different bits from different systems. They like different things. Like with Vancian Magic, this is often one that comes in. People say, why bother with Vancian Magic if you want that, play D&D? But what if you don't want D&D? What if you just want to have the Vancian Magic? It's
Amen.
you choose
Amen. That's the entire crux of what I was trying to present. Without and please, Savage World community, I'm not attacking you, but we have, as a community, I believe we've fallen into this sort of if you don't play it our way of Savage Worlds, then you don't belong. It's just this undercurrent, right? I'm not saying it's forefront of everyone's mind, but it annoys the hell out of me. But what I wanted, so we get away from, I'll come down. We'll come away from this. The question I want for Richard is, how long ago did you write these documents that I mentioned before?
The earliest ones were 2012.
2012.
That was like the Savage Armory, and I think the Vancian Magic was the last of my old style ones, which was, I don't know, I want to say 2015. I'm not sure, maybe 2016, I'm not sure.
So my question is two-part. One, what was the catalyst for writing those? So what inspired you to write those things? And secondly, if you just come across Suede, I know this is an odd one to answer, but if you just had Suede, would you have done it again? Would you have done it for Suede?
I don't know. I mean, I wrote them for different reasons. So I started out with the Supernaturalis, which was a cap setting, because I wanted to have kind of superpowered characters. This was before there was a Superpowers companion. In fact, when I first got into Savage Worlds, I saw that this guy on the forums had created a PDF called Savage Abilities. I think it was Savage Abilities, or Arcane Abilities, maybe it was called. And it was for creating low-powered superheroes. And I really liked the ideas he had in there, but I had my own ideas for how to do something similar. So I started working on my own cap setting, which was the Supernaturalis, which is basically superpowers, but much weaker and based on edges, not on powers. And but one of the things in there was the weapon creation system, and that got a lot of positive feedback. People didn't care so much about the rest of it, so I decided just to pull that out and turn it into a little PDF. And that's what kind of got me into the idea of just creating little PDFs for little things. So if a subject came up on the forums and it was something that I felt was more detail than I could provide in a post, then I'd turn it into a little PDF. And the Vancian Magic was different because that's actually a pretty big PDF if you've seen it. And that was when I was running War of the Burning Sky. So War of the Burning Sky was written for D&D 3.5, and I picked it up on Drive-Thru-RPG for $10. And this is like a 700-page campaign, massive campaign. It was really, really good. So I converted it across to Savage Worlds, and I was running it for my group, and I ran it for like a dozen sessions. But the more I ran it, the more difficult it was to try and convert the spell system, because it made all these assumptions about like the magic items and about the spell system. It assumed that people had access to all these like teleportation spells and flight spells and all of these other forms of magic, and all the NPCs and the societies and stuff were built around assumptions about this magic system. And I kept trying to do it with the Savage Worlds magic, and it just didn't work. It was like, square peg, round hole situation. And in the end, I thought, look, I need to do this properly. It's not working with the Savage Worlds magic system as written. And I thought, why not? The Superpowers companion, that's an alternative power system. Hellfrost, that is its own power system. There's nothing wrong with having a different power system for a different setting. So I created this Savage Vancian Magic as an alternative for converting D&D style settings across to Savage Worlds. And I found it ran really, really well after that. So one of my players, we'd originally ran a D&D campaign, and she really loves the Vancian Magic. And she just didn't like the Savage Worlds Magic very much, but she was very happy with the converted version I did, the Savage Vancian Magic one. And so really that was very much in response to running this campaign and trying it for a dozen sessions and just getting more and more difficult to run it with the rules as written.
Awesome. Very cool. So do you think that with the changes to Suede, running War of the Burning Skies would have been easier, or you'd still need what you'd done?
It would have been the same. It may be even harder, because the trappings in Savage Worlds Deluxe they encouraged you not just to make cosmetic changes, but also mechanical changes. And if you've seen some of my other ones, like the Savage Abilities, where I showed like a breakdown of how you could, really reverse engineer a lot of it, or the Savage Spellbook, where I showed how you could really push the whole trapping concept to the extreme. In Savage Worlds Deluxe, you were very much encouraged to, well, maybe not encouraged, but there were examples of it in there that you could actually switch out mechanics, and you could put like a penalty here in return for a bonus there. And in Suede, they've dropped that. And they've said that, the trappings should be cosmetic. Instead, you've got these modifiers which you can apply on the fly. I know some people really like that. I got mixed feelings on it. They in Savage Wars Deluxe, they always talked about the trappings being the heart and soul of the power system. And when people complained about the powers being very bland, I was, Savage Spellbook was my answer. Saying, look, actually, you can change the spells, you can customize them, you can do anything you like. But now the spell list really is a spell list because you can just change them cosmetically, and I think that's going to make it even harder to try and convert a D&D setting where you're trying to reproduce specific spells, because you can't even modify the mechanics really. You're only really supposed to change the cosmetics of the spells, and I think that would make it even more difficult to try and replicate some of the abilities that you'd have in D&D.
So Richard, earlier Paris mentioned that with the was it the Artificer edge? To making your own temporary magic item doesn't even work with the no PowerPoints rule. Do you have a solution to that?
Not really. It's not really. It's the same problem with the alchemy arcane background in the old Fantasy Companion. It's based around. I think you'd have to really design it completely differently.
What about something like Solomon Kane, where the magic system, when you cast a spell, you just have a penalty? What if the PowerPoints that you need to create the item just becomes a penalty to maybe a dramatic task? Do you think that would be an option?
It wouldn't be an option I'd use, because the issue here is that you end up back with a stockpiling situation. There's not really a great deal of danger if you're doing this outside of a combat situation. Okay, you can have the dramatic task, but that's going to get tiring pretty quick. It's going to get old pretty fast. So if people can just sit at home and just churn out these potions, and they're just making a penalty to the roll, then they're eventually going to succeed, and they're just going to build up a stash of these potions, as many as they want, really.
Yeah, but if they fail, there could be something bad that happens. Their lab blows up, or they changed they turned the whole town into a ghost town or something like that.
Yeah, but then what? The people are going to sit at home and do it anyway, because they think, well, then you end up, if it's so dangerous that it's like adventuring, then the whole campaign just becomes this guy sitting at home, turning out magic items, and the rest of the party are killing off all of these random monsters that keep jumping up.
That's been my argument about creating magic items.
Yeah, I understand that. But my approach would not be to try and emphasize that part of it, because then you're really emphasizing the downtime by making it so dangerous. My approach would be to try and move it to the background. Don't have it as the emphasis, as the focus of the campaign. It's something you need time to do, and the other players can do something else in that time, but it's still something you rush over quickly.
Right, but to me, it goes back to what Gary mentioned earlier, is that I think that once you give the players the power to create magic items in your setting, you take away that kind of wonder effect of magic, how it's supposed to be something important, something marvelous. So I think it has to be tied to the story to create a magic item. There has to be some type of questing attached to it. It has to be important. If you just want to create temporary magic items like potions, you've got the arcane devices in the core rules that are already there for you to tinker with and adapt and all that. But when it comes to creating artifacts, yeah,
you're talking about artifacts as another level entirely, really. I think we before the show we were talking briefly about my Eldritch weapons. One of the other little fan supplements I did, and in Eldritch Weapons, there is some guidelines in there how players could create like a relic of world-shattering impact, and in that it's the guidelines are basically that it should be a number of adventures to find the ingredients and whatever that you need for it, the various components, or to get the right things that you need, the right instructions, the right people or whatever. and then you go through the dramatic task with various modifiers on that. So it becomes like a major thing that would take multiple sessions to complete. But then you're talking about a really significant item, and it comes down to the sort of the setting mindset as well. Because if you're running a game that's got like a D&D style setting where magic is very common, then the expectation is that people have lots and lots of magic items. And yeah, you can make these items much weaker for Savage Worlds, so it doesn't have so much impact. But you don't then want to say, okay, your character's got like 2 rings, 2 bracelets, and necklace. Oh, and you want to get like a toe ring. Okay, that's going to be like two adventures and a dramatic task.
What about a Prince Albert?
Well, that would be a double dramatic task, and you don't want to fail that one. You don't want to fail that.
These are always things that need to be addressed because of players. So
it just reeks of power gaming to me.
It does, right?
That depends on the power of it, because if these magical items only give minor benefits, and the campaign is based around the assumption that players have a number of these magic items, then it's not power gaming. It'd be power gaming if people are trying to min-max and get super powerful items. But what do these items primarily give you flavor? Like we were talking about before, if you've got items like your portable hole, which you can do some awesome stuff with, but it's not going to make you deadly in combat. Maybe you can use it for some cunning tricks or something. And if you've got your ring, maybe it's a ring of camouflage, and the GM says, okay, under the Suede rules, you can spend a penny to change the story in some way. I'm going to say that because you got this ring, you can spend a penny to change the story in a way that can incorporate your camouflage effect. So you're not really giving like a massive bonus. It's just kind of tying in with the existing rules as more of a trapping. And
but is that going to satisfy the power gamer, though?
We're not worrying about the power gamer. This is the point. You're trying to.
I am worried.
Screw the power gamer, okay? This is about trying to stick to the setting. And if the setting involves characters with lots of cool magic trinkets, then fair enough, And even if you do want the characters to have powerful magic items, if every player has like 5 powerful magic items, but everyone has it, then it's just increased the baseline. That's no different from. You could even say, okay, we're going to use the superpowers companion. Everybody gets 20 power points worth of devices. Those are your magic items. If you lose one, you can find another, but you can't go above the limit of 20 power points worth of magic items.
Yeah, that was another thing I was thinking about. To introduce magic items, why not just use the superpowers companion, like you said?
Yeah.
You use trappings of those powers, and then like you said, base level. Yeah.
And just based on the arguments there, Eric, like I can understand, and that's sort of how we started this discussion, was you're concerned that creating magic items would create this power gamer trap, which has happened in other systems. And
no, I'm concerned that what drives the need for someone to ask if I can create magic items for my character is a power gamer.
Well, no, because as Richard pointed out, it can also be flavor. So if I decide that I want to make a runesmith type character for my game, right? I want to make a runesmith type character for my game. Obviously, I can't make runesmith armor at novice. I have to learn how to do that, and that can be part of the progression of the game. And if the GM wants to build in some safeguards so that it doesn't just become an easy win button, maybe using that magic item that I've created later, instead of power points, the wielder actually suffers a level for fatigue after a battle or after a certain amount of rounds. So then the player then has to decide whether using that particular magic item in that way is worth the risk of going down a level of fatigue. The thing is, it goes back to creative that we can do all sorts of different things, and what Richard comes up for his magic setting will be very different to yours, to Gary's, to mine. But the problem is, without any kind of structure, without any base foundation to work on, right? And if we're arguing that there's this underlying design philosophy to Savage Worlds that will cut stuff out because it doesn't fit, right? Then not only have we created within our community this sense of it doesn't belong in Savage Worlds, go to another setting or another system, right? Or you're a power gamer, go away, right? we should be able to do anything with Savage Worlds. We should be with arms open wide saying Savage Worlds can do anything. In your setting, you can create it. But here's some guidelines. Here's some of the, as you're pointing out, some of the pitfalls and traps that if you allow this wide open approach, you're going to create all these problems for you within game. I'm currently doing that where I've got a group at work that I'm teaching to become setting builders and GMs. And this first time, I'm letting them do whatever they want, right? Because when they go to play the game and the GM's pretty much saying yes to everybody, we're going to watch this game fall over because it's going to be too powerful. It's a cybernetics game. He's allowing them to have everything. And so once we've had that experience, we can then cut it back and go, okay, if we're going to reapproach this setting, these are the guidelines and some frameworks that we need to have in place. Because one of the things about Savage Worlds is because it has almost endless possibility, people come into it and they either get analysis paralysis or they take everything. And we don't want them to do that either. There has to be some understanding of how things can be structured within the game so that the game remains fun and playable for everybody. And just saying, no, it can't be done is not the answer. And just having open slather is not the answer. So I think we're not going to come up with the answer on this podcast.
No,
but
here we are. Let's do it.
Opening up discussion.
Let's answer this.
No, I think once you start to introduce things like magic items and giving them the players, their characters, to me, magic is very volatile. You shouldn't be concerned about balance and not taking the game where you don't want it to go, power-wise or game balance-wise. You shouldn't be concerned about that. I think it goes back to what it says in the core that, do we actually need rules for this? Or the GM can just say, okay, you want to create this magic item because of X? Okay, let's come up with something. And if that's what you want, to me, it's no different from wanting for that character having a particular goal. If that's what you want, we're going to work on a character arc for your character on this. I think it's a futile quest to actually look for the perfect balance of power with magic items, because it just comes down to this setting. Really, is it interesting for your setting? Is it needed, important for your setting? If so, then yes. What's the problem?
Let me ask you this, Eric. Pinnacle brings out the next fantasy companion, and all it is a Suede update to what it was. Would you be happy with that?
Yes. I'll tell you why. When I think this is maybe the reason that it's not in there is because you're looking for guidelines on how to create a magic item, how to tell your players to do this. And the thing is that's diverse. That's too diverse for them to sit down and say, this is the way that you do it. You could, there's a couple of things that I want to bring up. PowerPoints, no PowerPoints in a potion maker. Why not make an arcane background or an edge or something like that is potion maker that, like the other ones, has spell points. So the entire system, when you're casting a spell, doesn't use PowerPoints. But this one small section of alchemy, you get 10 points as an alchemist. And so every day when you go to make your spell points, you use those spell power points and you dump them in. So you can only make, let's say, maybe 2 or 3 potions a day, and that's it. Because you're pulling from a separate pool, still using no power points, using only for making this, so that you've now stopped the issue of unlimited potions. Secondly, when it comes to creating magic items, there's a lot to it. Let's say I brought up the idea of you need to be a woodworker, a metalsmith, all this other stuff. But let's toss all that aside and say that you're now arcane background enchanter. So you can imbue a magic item, which means you don't have to know how to use a hammer. You don't have to know wood crafting or any of that stuff. You just want to empower an item with something. That then uses your ability. But here's the trick. What if... there's multiple ways to go about it. Do you sacrifice another magic item of equal power to transfer its power into an item? Do you just cast randomly? Do you choose X amount of power points to give it a +1 or a +4? Or do you do you just give it an edge? Do you see what I'm saying? There's so many different ways to actually create the item that how you create a magic item would be super varied, and it's not the kind of thing that they could pinpoint it down and say this is how you do it. Point. I'll give you one example. In Defiance of Flan, one of the bugbears at the end has a shield of black scale, dragon scale, and it's non-magical. And in my games, they wanted to imbue that with magical properties, and so I had them as a sub-quest, find X amount of things, or you're going to need X amount of gold, and this enchanter's going to need a week to do it. So when they got back to Flan, they just dropped it off at a guy that could do it. They went off and did their questing. Leads into my third part here, and came back, and then he got it. This is also the reason why I don't think that you should have it in game, because it's not when you go to play a fantasy setting, or you're an adventurer. You're not like, come over to my house and let's play item craft 7, version 7th edition. You're going to do stuff. You're going to adventure. You're going to, rescue the princess or whatever.
But we're not arguing doing it in game. We're just arguing that we should be allowed to do it if we want.
Yes.
You're telling me I have to hand it to an NPC. So you're telling me there's someone in this world. I'm a wild card. I'm a hero.
No. I'm telling you, you're the GM. You make the call.
You make it up.
It's a game that empowers the GMs. To me, that's what Savage Worlds is.
And that's my point.
You're waiting for an official answer that.
No, I'm waiting for a guide, because I will always do it my way.
You're waiting for someone to tell you it's okay to do what you're doing.
And I'm saying they can't tell you that because there is such a myriad of ways of doing it. They could come up with that, like I said, an item enchanter. You could take it to an NPC. You could, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like they could say this is the way that you do it, because there's so many ways of doing this thing that you want to do. Creating a magic item is vast and varied.
Yeah. The thing is that the Fantasy Companion itself is very much an optional thing. Anything in the Fantasy Companion is going to be something you would tailor to your setting or ignore. It's got like a huge list after list after list of magic items, and in many settings you wouldn't use those. Those are very much geared towards your traditional D&D style setting, where you roll on random tables for random magic items. So I don't think it would hurt if you just had like an extra one page just with like some instructions on how the players could create them. Instead, they got like a sidebar explaining that NPCs create them.
That's what I'm saying is that it couldn't just be a sidebar, because creating a magic item, you can do it a million ways. It would take up too much real estate inside the book. You could say you can only do it this way.
You could do it a million ways, and for certain settings to handle. But if you look, you've got the list of magic items. And it's a massive list. It takes up page after page after page. You'd only need an extra one page just with a common set of edges, just showing how a player would typically create them. And you could have some general notes in there. It doesn't have to be for every setting, because nothing in the Fantasy Companion is for every setting. You've got all those monsters. Many of those won't fit at all in many settings. You've got siege rules, which I've never used. There's anything in the companions. The companions are a toolkit. People can take out what they want, and a lot of the stuff in there is going to apply to many settings, but not to every setting at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think they could give one example. Could this example be used in whatever setting? I don't think so. I mean, you look at Codex Infernus and Aberon, if you're going to create magic items in either settings, it's probably going to be a lot different. Mechanically, maybe not that much. But I mean, I've mentioned the dramatic task before. Why not just do that?
One thing also I think worth repeating, and I mentioned it before, that people don't like to hear it, but the Fantasy Companion really is geared towards D&D style fantasy. And you look at it, it's got all the extra edges in there for the common D&D professions. It's got the random magic item tables, just like D&D items. So just having something else for handling magic item creation the same way, I don't think that would hurt. It would only take one extra page.
No, it wouldn't hurt. But like I said before the show, and I know we didn't want to have this debate, and we're closing in now, but I think creating permanent magic items in a game is very niche. It's not something that every group does, and I don't think it's something that people coming from D&D expect. But that's just my opinion. apparently, obviously, Paris has different experience with that, with his groups. But to me, it's never been an issue. It's never come up. But it's come up in Paris game, and this is why we're having this episode. And
I've seen it come up in a number of threads, a number of discussions, and I think this is why this new Artificers book came up on the swag was because of this, and obviously it's already hit silver bestseller, so some people obviously want it.
Yeah, I just haven't come across it. It just strikes me as something very, very niche to me.
Oddly enough, neither have I, and I think it's because I played so much fantasy.
5 years, right?
Right. I haven't played a lot of fantasy coming over to Savage Worlds. Like I'm actually starting to get the itch and I'm thinking about running some stuff in fantasy. But man, I've done a lot of space stuff. I've done pirates, old Wild West. Like I've done pretty much everything and inside of 50 Fathoms. I just use the random generators. I love the way magic items work in this game. I think they're fantastic. And Paris, the last thing I want to say is why don't
none of your players come up and say, I want my character to be able to make magic items, right?
No, we're too busy doing things. Why don't you just come up with a way that you like to make them or see them done? You know what I mean? Like, why don't you just come up with arcane background enchanter, flesh that out of your own accord?
I think where we're missing the point, or at least my point, is, and look, you guys are not wrong. Right? Because you're coming at it from your table and you're coming at it from your side, and what you does works, right? What I'm saying is, there are many rules in Savage Worlds I haven't used yet because I've never had a Gatling gun in a game yet, so I haven't had to use whatever the rules are around a Gatling gun. And as much as I want to play different genres, the guys that I get come in, they want to play fantasy as much as it kicks my ass because I'm over the fantasy genre in a lot of instances because I've done so much of it. And there is an expectation from those players that they want to do certain things, right? They don't even know D&D, but they have this idea of fantasy and being able to create an alchemist and be able to create an artificer, and they want to be able to do those things. And currently, as the rules
World of Warcraft,
fantasy, hey. Yeah, maybe exactly. So they've come across a World of Warcraft. They want to do these things. Now, you and I and Gary and Richard too, maybe we might go, shit, we've been playing this game for ages. Why the hell would we want to, if you've played World of Warcraft and you grind out for material and you make all the stuff, it is time consuming and it's boring as crap. I'm not saying there needs to be a system for that. What I'm saying is that I've got 2 points. One, as a community, we shouldn't just tell people they can't do stuff if they want to do it. Right, because it's their game. We can at least guide them and say, I don't do it in my game, but here's my idea, maybe on how to do it, or I don't do it, but run over to godwars2.org/savageworlds. There's another plug, and there's some give you a go, right? For all those that go, I'm sick of arguing about this. Go ask Richard. Like, why hasn't that happened? But no, it's just flat out. It's not in the book. It doesn't apply. I can't see why you'd want to use it. Go away. It doesn't make any sense to me. So even if Shane and Clint never, ever have creating magic items come up in any game they will ever play in the past or in the future, if they produce a fantasy companion next, I'm begging them, go and look at all the questions that people that have come across the Savage Worlds are asking. And they may never apply to the majority of Savage Worlds people. They may never apply to what I call our core Savage Worlds group, but they need to look at those things and they go, you know what, we need to have at least a discussion of it. There has to be a chapter in that goes, look, we think it should be run roughly like this, or there should be some basis on how to do it. And then each of us will modify that in our own way that'll fit our settings.
They did. You just don't like their answer.
No, they didn't. There is nothing anywhere about creating magic items.
I just read it. Arcane devices are relatively temporary creation.
Temporary. I want a permanent solution.
Truly permanent magic items or devices are setting specific. Don't use PowerPoints and are created by the game master as she sees fit.
That's what I'm saying too.
That's beautiful. And that's fantastic for Suede, but the fantasy companion can't just rely on that. I'm sorry. People write in, tell me where I'm going wrong. Obviously,
well, there's swag, write your own. Maybe you and Richard can
I'll help you out, bro.
I already created a few of them. I mean, this is the thing. Okay, if you're playing a normal Savage Worlds game and a player says, okay, we've got like a 1 week downtime between adventures. I've got an advance. I'm going to spend this time mastering this longsword. I'm already a good fighter. I'm going to spend the time mastering this longsword, and I'm going to take trademark weapon for my longsword. And that's pretty reasonable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that as being any different from the mage that says, okay, we've got a week of downtime. I'm going to spend that time forging myself a cool magical cloak. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is that it keeps balanced. That people aren't just able to create power for themselves, but if you've got some way to keep that in check, so that you could even do this as a trapping. The person could say, okay, I'm going to take this magical thieves. I'm going to construct this magical thieves cloak. And actually, this
my
is going to be
stealth die goes up.
It's actually going to be the thief edge, but for me, it's actually this cloak which gives me these abilities. And it's it's okay. Downtime. You don't want to have the person then having to say, okay, I'm going to describe every moment as I'm training with this sword, just as you wouldn't want describing every moment when they're constructing this cloak. But the way I see it is just, the player wants to have something cool and unique about themselves. And some people do that just through taking edges or attributes. And some people like to customize their character by creating cool magical items for themselves. And some people don't like that, and that's fair enough. And there's a lot of things I don't like as well. I don't really play the superpower games, but I'm not going to tell someone they shouldn't, buy the superpowers companion or whatever. If somebody, and likewise with the fantasy companion, I've got to be honest with you, I don't think there's anything I would use from the fantasy companion now, because even the monster list at the back, I've got my own monster lists. The magic item tables I don't like for balance reasons. There's not really anything in the fantasy companion I would use that really does need an update. By comparison, some of the other companions have got some really good stuff in there that I can pull out, but this is the point for me about companions, is that they are toolkits that people take out what they want for their games. And I'm not going to tell people that they shouldn't have something just because I don't want it.
No, and I'm not saying that I'm against it. I'm saying people are overthinking it. It's Savage Worlds. It's Fast, Fun, Furious. It shouldn't be that complicated,
No.
You want something.
You could fit it on a page or so. That was all it would take. Just a few edges.
For a way to create them. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. For a way, for some, it's just somebody's opinion on how they should be created. Somebody else might have another cool way. I just feel like you're asking for your hand to be held through the rule book, and at some point you got to put on your big boy GM panties and stand up and say, okay, this is the way that I like them to be done. Or even better, sit down with your player and be like, what do you want out of this? This is our game. We're playing this together. How in depth do you want to go into making this? Do you want to gather all the components? Do you just want to cast a spell? Do you just want to put an edge on it? Find out what they're looking for. And I say create it yourself. There's a lot of times lately when I'm reading stuff in Savage Worlds that I don't like, and I don't care if it says it in the book. We're not doing it that way because I think it sucks. And then we'll get into a discussion about why I think it sucks. And if you can change my mind, we'll go the other route. But this is the way that I think it should be.
That's great, and that's fine for you. You're a veteran GM. You've got a lot of experience with the system. I think we all have quite a lot of experience with it. But the podcast is for beginners and veterans alike.
True.
And when people are new to Savage Worlds, they don't have that gut feeling for how to balance this sort of thing. I think a simple set of guidelines just for a new player, just for a new GM, even if it is just a case of to keep these in mind, and you could just a half a page, even just a page maximum, just for the new player, because this is really what it should be aimed at. Because veteran GMs, they can ignore most of the rules. We can toss out loads of stuff, and we can just make up any of the magical items. I don't use the magic item lists. When I'm generating monsters, honestly, even when I'm running my own setting, I rarely bother looking up the stat blocks. I just give them like a D6 or a D8 or something and toss in a few abilities. And you can do that once you know the system. But for beginners, they need more guidance, so that they can know what's later. They can discard it. That's fine. But to start with, and this is what this should be really aimed at, I think.
Yeah.
The companions are for people that want to really run their own settings, and they're not confident enough to plug in all the holes themselves yet. So they've got like a toolkit that they can use to help themselves out.
Yeah,
This
This is the exact reason why you are such a champion inside of Savage Worlds, because you just immediately changed my mind. Because, like, we all look at it from our own perspectives, but you're right. I would toss a lot of it away because I have been gaming so long. And you're perfect sense. I'm 100% behind putting item enchantment inside the Fantasy Companion. Write down multiple different ways. Try this way, try this way, try this way. Here's an edge that will, or, arcane background item enchanter, put in multiple different ways so that people can see now. Yeah, I'm on board. You've just completely see what I mean.
And I would say you don't even need to have a lot. The only thing is just to give people a little bit of a head start, because you don't need to have every possible way of handling this. Just one way is enough, I think, because this is really just for people who don't have an idea of how to do it themselves. Once they've seen, I could do it this way, then they can start to think, but I could also do it this way. So really, this is just for people to get started with,
Well, I believe we gave a couple ideas. I was waiting on Paris to tell us how he handles it, but that never came up. I mean, Richard brought up the trappings on various edges, brought up even like very minor magic items, something that gives a +1 when you score a raise to damage. That's very minor. I brought up the dramatic tasks to craft something. So I hope that people got a few ideas out of that.
Sometimes because someone's asking the question, it doesn't mean that they don't necessarily know the answer, but they would like not validation from the community, but they would like to hear other opinions. So if I ask the question, for instance, on how to make magic items, I have my own idea, right? And I'll run with it, but to save me maybe some time or some heartache down the road on my game, where because of a call that I've made has made my game difficult because something's too powerful or it becomes an easy win button, I like someone like yourself, Eric, or Richard or Gary, to come in and say, well, actually, we had a look at that in our game briefly, or I haven't looked at that in my game, but because I'm experienced in Savage Worlds, I think you're going to run into this problem and this problem. Have you thought of this? And you and I have had discussions about how I was looking at doing the hindrance for terminally ill and stuff like that. And we've, there's various elements where you've gone, I'm not playing that kind of game, Paris, but this is what I would do because I'm an experienced Savage Worlds GM. So when people ask a question on Facebook, please write in and tell me if I'm wrong. But just saying we don't do that in Savage Worlds or go to another system is not only counterproductive to our hobby or to the Savage Worlds game, but it puts us in a bad light, and then people run away and go, Savage Worlds is crap because A, B, C, and D. And yet we're all sitting here going, Savage Worlds is the best thing since sliced bread. Here's why.
Yeah, but this is Facebook, Paris. It's Facebook.
Facebook is a dumb cesspool of humanity.
If I ask the question on the Peg Inc. forum, if I ask the question on Facebook, if I ask it on MeWe, ultimately the loudest voice will be, don't do it that way, go back to blah, blah. Don't do that, man. I'm not picking on anyone specific. I'm certainly not picking on Eric, who is the counterpoint to me at the moment.
Yes, you are. And I know you hate the community.
Oh, yeah.
You hate them.
I love the community. Don't be like that. But if people have looked at this and some people have different needs out of a game system that is for everybody. We should be inclusive, not exclusive. And just because it won't work in our game or we don't want it, doesn't mean it doesn't have a place. And if you don't have anything to add to the discussion, maybe don't say anything then. But for those that like those things of looking at how rules work and how to do balance where possible, or the philosophy of the game system, then put your 2 cents worth in. But if your only answer is there, don't like that, D, go back, then don't. I
think you're trying to fight the nature of the internet right now.
Bring it on. These shoulders can take it. But I'm eternally grateful to Richard being on today. As I've actually pulled back a lot of talking about the stuff that I've used from Richard's work, not because it's not fantastic, but I want people to go and have a look at it and don't take my opinion of it. I want them to have a look at it and use it in their own game. So for those that didn't get it before, godwars2.org/Savage Worlds.
Oh my God.
All those PDFs there, they're absolutely fantastic. They are awesome work. Take what you want out of them. Whatever you don't like, just ignore it. Don't send Richard a rude word. Don't say, Richard, that was crap. I don't want that. Because I did. Suck it. Thank you, Richard. Awesome.
This is Paris saying, suck it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Good conversation, man. I really liked this. This was entertaining start to finish, I got to say.
Yeah. All
It
right.
helps when you bring intelligent people on like Richard.
Ooh, sick burn.
So, tell us what you thought about this episode or any other episode. You can reach us at thewildeye@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook, Mew, YouTube. You'll find us there at the Wild Eye Podcast. We're also at the Nerds International group on Mew. So show up there if you want to chat with us. We're on Twitter at The Wild Eye, and we also have a Patreon if you want to support us, if you believe in what we do, if you're a member of that community that is mean and that Paris hates, throw us a few dollars.
I do not hate
Patreon.com/The Wild Eye. And I think, you know what? Right in the middle of this show, we got a new Patreon, new patrons. Let me pull up the name here. That would be Mr. Muagan. I don't know his real name, but thank you, Mr. Muagan. I think we met him on Mew last week, so thank you. And the rest of you, there'll be a swave and full of sexual innuendo. Jingle here.
Oh, yeah.
All right, everybody, you know what time it is. It's time for the sexy Patreon jingle of love. Here we go. Daniel Brown, it's time to touch my magic wand. Beware the flying missiles. Sean Richard, Per Chalmers, Alan Bray. This is a magic jingle meant to make your junk tingle. Conrad, Erasmus Neubert, Greg Bruni. You want to go for a ride on my magic broomy? Zoom zoom. Corey Judd, Ray Asteria, and Rob Powell. Come on down to the steamy forge, take your shirts off, and let's craft some love shackles. Bubbles, your name is already magical. Manuel Sams, show me your magic sausage and let me figure out how to activate it. Pow pow. Matt Stock, pure mongrel, your magic arrows make me quiver. See what I did there? Stephen Dragonspawn, Daryl Cartier, I got your long sword of love right here. +1. Zovia RPG Maps. Grab my magic quill of endless ink and let's write a love story. Frank Turfler, I made a special potion for you. Flesh to stone, 'cause I heard it makes you hard. Gil Deschard, Louis Strad, and John Schronheim. Check out my sexy bag of beans. It's a wondrous item. John Peterson and Carl Kiesler. Wait right here while I put on my Ring of the Ram and whip out my Staff of Charming. Mr. Stagg, Remy Bilodeau, how about you rub my figurine of wondrous power? This is the part of the jingle where I usually run out of ideas. But Dave, the Digital Dungeon Master, I got one for you. After all of the sexy time I've gonna have, I'm gonna need you to rub some Keogton's ointment on my junk. Kevin Stanley, Jan Yetma, I found goggles of the night and oil of slipperiness in my robe of useful items. And that spells good times. Michael Morrison, does this rag smell like a potion of paralysis? Oops, sorry. Not sorry. Lastly, Mr. Malgon, Magwen. Somebody tell me how to say his name, but he's our newest patron. I just took a potion of longevity, so show me your portable hole and I'll show you my staff of the python.
Muy bien.
After that jingle, I've never been more embarrassed at being aroused in my entire life.
So yeah, Richard, thanks a lot, man. As always, your input is very appreciated. Do you want to plug something? You got your latest product that we already plugged for you, right?
Sorry.
And there's already your fantasy archetypes plugged for you, and you said there's another one coming up with a bard.
That's the second one. Yeah. Still working on it.
Any I don't know, a gnome illusionist or something like that? No.
No.
How about an alchemist and an artificer?
It's like pulling teeth to get Richard to tell us what he's working on all of a sudden. Maybe have you got this? Come on, man.
There's an Artificer in there, yeah.
Yes.
There we go. All right, everybody. This is Eric saying, go back to playing D&D.
This is Paris saying, I'm starting the Richard Woolcock fan club. Anyone who wants to join, just message me.
You've already started it, bro. Richard, what are you saying today? This is Richard Woolcock, and you're saying?
Good night.
Wow.
Hey, man, it's like 1:15 in the morning here, right?
Oh, okay, fair enough. Because you were right in there in the magic item.
Like 3 times already, Gary. So
it's like you stepped off the cliff and you fell away, and we're like, where'd Richard go? And all we're hearing is you in the bush. I'm over here. This is Gary saying, pull out your longsword, make it vibrate, make it glow, make the tip turn purple. Keep your pants on, keep it fun. Thanks, everyone. We're out.
Longsword.
Wild Die Podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by Pinnacle Entertainment Group or official Pinnacle licensees. Any of the products mentioned on our show or appear on our website are the property and copyright of the respected owners. All music and artwork is used with permission of Pinnacle Entertainment Group. All items are used under fair use and educational and review purposes. All other items are the intellectual property of the Wild Die Podcast.